Hi, and welcome to today's podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Maximo's new budget monitoring application that was released in May with Maximo 7608. Today's broadcast will be recorded and it'll be placed up on our website along with the PowerPoint that I'll reference as we go through it. All lines are on mute until the end, and then what we'll do is open it up for some questions. Then, as we go through the webinar, you can toss a question in using the little dialogue in the GoToWebinar interface there. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the number one most requested Maximo enhancement that has been around for a while is the ability to do budget monitoring, and IBM has delivered with that in their latest release 7608. So it's an application that comes to you at no additional cost if you're under a maintenance agreement with IBM, and the budget monitoring application allows you to create budget records done against transactions for any financial period that you define. So this can be through the financial periods that are as part of Maximo, or you can just specify a year and not necessarily a month or a quarter. You can just say the entire year of 2018, for example. Okay. So today's presentation is going to be a mix of both a live demonstration, which I'll spend the majority of the time in, and supplemented by PowerPoints just to drive home a point or to allow you something that you can reference after the broadcast. So where will you find the budget monitoring application? So in your left-hand navigation menu, or what was called the old go-to menu, you'll find it under financial, and you'll find it under budget monitoring. So it's one level deep in the menu that you're all used to. And of course, you'll see I've actually put it on my start center so I can get to it pretty quick. So let's walk through the application at a very high level. So once you launch it and you create a new record, this is kind of what it looks like. So it looks like the rest of the Maximo applications, but I think it's good to go through and let's talk about some of the fields that are actually here. So one of them is a budget ID. So this is a sequential number, just like a work order, but you can override this with your tag for the budget. And in this case, I'm doing a 2017 budget for a packaging line. So I'm just focusing, as you'll see, on a specific location. This is the status of the budget. In this case, it's in draft. We'll go through the workflow and the different status changes and what they mean here in a minute. Then you have the time period. This is the slice of time that you're interested in. So these are used as the clipping boundaries for work orders, POs, and other activities, other transactions in Maximo for the period that you're interested in. More on that to follow. Here's the supervisor of the budget, the person that approves it, and the person that establishes the budget. And skipping forward here, you'll see an area that's called focal points. Now, in some of the IBM documentation, they'll call these an axis or axes. And really, what it is how do you want to define the budget? What are you interested in? So if the focus is on locations or assets or work orders or a general ledger string or a segment of a general ledger string, you can use it. We'll show you how this is used. Then down here are the actual budget lines that are generated from that focal point. All right, so that's kind of the layout of the screen and what I think is the right elements to know going in. Now there are some great 4 new actions that are great that are over here in the more actions, and I've highlighted them with this orange box. So the first button, the first one there is generate budget lines. So once you define a focal point and you hit generate budget lines, the bottom table here, these lines are then filled out for you. The update budget is once the budget's approved, the update budget will go out, interrogate Maximo, look at all the transactions that have occurred during that period of time, that slice of time, and then throw in numbers based on or for estimated cost, committed cost, and actual costs based on rules that you set up for each of those buckets. Manage focal points is where you can create new focal points. There are 9 that come out of the box. I'll show you those. And then the Manage Rules button here, the last one, is used to create your rules for what is a committed cost, what is an actual cost, etc. Okay. So let's talk about the lifecycle statuses real quick. We'll do that right up front, and I think that will play into the demo that we're going to be doing. So when you create a new budget, it goes into a draft status, of course, and once it's in draft status, you can take it to awaiting approval. You could also, from waiting approval, send it back to draft. Once you're at waiting approval, you can also send it, perhaps through a workflow, to an approved status so that somebody could approve it. But if the logged in user is the owner or the supervisor of the budget, then they can take it right from a draft to approved without going through waiting approval. Okay. If you're at waiting approval, you can also cancel it and just go to an end state with it. It goes like it archives it out. And if you're at approved, you go to a close, and then it goes to the same endpoint. So there's a couple of things to note here with this star. These are the statuses where you can generate budget lines. Okay, so in a draft, awaiting approval, or an approved status is when you can hit that action that says generate budget lines. Okay, but it's only in, I noted that with this red star, only once it's approved can you actually go out and collect the cost against the budget or against the budget lines. You can do this manually with that select actions budget, with that select action button, or your other choice is to use a cron that IBM provides that just says update my budget every so often, and you can set up the frequency that you want that cron to run. Okay. So the rules on the cost collection bucket are done under Manage Rules, and IBM provides some out-of-the-box rules for cost collection, which we'll go through. But as I said earlier, you can create your own definition. And the reason for that is obviously one customer might have a certain way they define a committed cost, or when they claim a cost to actually be actual, and that's not going to be the standard for every customer. So IBM gives you the latitude you need to kind of make this your own. Okay. So the roles, as I see them, kind of go like this. There's a budget administrator, and that person is the one that actually defines the focal points. They also define the rules for what goes in what bucket and at which point they go in what bucket. You have a budget manager. That's the person that actually creates the budget and uses the focal points and the rules that the administrator has set up. Okay, and then any Maximo user, just by the fact that they're doing transactions and putting work orders in, they don't even really know the budget is being tracked, but just by the fact that they're cutting purchase orders or moving work orders to a different status or completing actuals, they're actually filling out the budget as it is exercised and as clipped by the time on those work orders. Okay, so let's go ahead and do one. The first scenario I'm going to set up is I'm going to get into Maximo here, and I'm going to set up a budget for a specific asset. My approach is always to start simple and then get more complex as we go. So let's do that. So I'll go into Maximo here, and I'll just log in as me. And what you'll see over here under financial, you'll see budget monitoring right here. I went ahead and put it on my start center, so I'll just launch it from right there. So in this case, I've got a lot more than 12 budgets out there, but my choice was to show a result set that only showed me the ones that are in draft or approved. I'm not looking at the ones that are closed or canceled. So it's a filter that I've put on here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new budget. And I'll just call this, I'll leave the number there. It's 1064, and I'll just say this is 2017 budget example. Okay, and you notice that everyone on the call probably realizes that the asterisk means it's a required field. So here in this period, I can put in the year or the financial period. So if I put in a financial period, maybe like 2017-09, and if I click this, it actually puts in the clip date for the month of September, right? But I can also wipe that out, and if I put in the year, maybe it's for the whole year, it's the entire year, I can put that in. I'll put myself as the owner. And now the next thing to do is to create a focal point. So in this case, the focal point is going to be based on an asset. Now when you pick the condition, which assets do you want to include and create budget lines for, there's a couple of ways to do it. With this chevron pointing to the right, you can go and select it from your conditional expressions. You can go and pick it from a query that you've already established against assets, or you can use the conditional expression manager, which is the same kind of interface that is used for reports and other things that people would be used to. In this case, I've actually got a query out there. So I'll just pull that up, and here's the query that you can see that's saved, and it's just going to return one asset. So it's in draft. Notice that the requirement for financial period has gone away because I've specified it just for the year. And now it comes time to generate the budget lines. You can see there's none down here now. So when I hit this generate budget line action, it's going to execute this focal point in this query and create a budget line. So I'll go ahead and say generate budget line. And it goes out there, it found one asset, and I can open up this twisty right here, and when I come down, all these gray boxes are calculated. They'll be, once I update the budget, it'll go out and interrogate Maximo's transaction and populate estimated cost, committed, or actual cost based on the rules I put in for those buckets. So now I'm just essentially putting in a budget amount. So I might say for this asset, I'm going to budget $10,000 in internal labor, $5,000 in external labor, in direct material that's going to be charged directly to the asset. I might say that's going to be $500. Shared material is really stocked material. It's stuff that's in a storeroom. I'll say that's $250. And no outside services, no tools for this. And you can also track, put a budget in for hours, not dollars. A lot of people in their Maximo system may just be tracking the hours and not necessarily the dollars. So maybe you want to just budget against a certain amount of hours. So I might say here, I'm going to budget 1,000 hours and maybe 500 hours in external labor. So when I save this, you'll see it adds up. So I've got a total budget of $15,750 for this asset for that period of time for all of 2017. So from this point, I would go ahead and change the status to approved. I can either change the status by going over here. There's those three choices. I could hit approved, or I could just hit approve budget right here, and it'll approve the budget. And of course, timestamp it. So now this is approved, which means I can go ahead and run an update on the budget. So I'll go ahead and do that. And I'll execute it, and it'll go out and look at PRs, work orders, POs, other transactions in Maximo, and it will populate the estimated cost, the committed cost, and actual cost. And it gives you some percents too. This is the percent of committed dollars against budget, and the percentage of actual dollars against budget. And you see that here. So it sums it up for you here, but we'll show you the breakdown in detail down below. So here, for example, I had 1,000 hours budgeted, and I estimated 14, and I've committed 11. And I actually, on the actuals tab on work orders associated with that asset, have accumulated 4 hours as an example. Okay. So, and then from there, just to kind of complete the cycle, I can change the status at the end of the year. I could go in and move that to closed, and that would complete the cycle. Now, I would envision a lot of organizations might, at the end of a period, have an escalation or something like that, go out and close these so that housekeeping was made easy for you. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. And let's run through one more example that would involve a little bit more. So here we're going to set up, maybe in this scenario, I want to set up a 2018 budget. I suspect a lot of you out there are in the middle of budget exercises right now at a corporate level for 2018. And in this example, my scenario is I may want to create a budget for all critical assets, and I'll define critical as locations that have a priority of 1 for the Bedford site in my database, in my data set here. So let's go do that. So go back to Maximo. I always like to start at my start center. I'll go to budget monitoring. I'm going to put in a new budget. And I'm going to name this something specific here, 2018 test. This is 2018 budget for critical locations. Okay, go ahead and put in 2018 here. Put in myself as a supervisor, and then the focal point on this one is going to be locations. So as before, I've got 3 ways to put in and fulfill this query. I'm going to go ahead and do it from a query. For locations, I have a query saved where I look at all locations in Bedford with a priority of 1. And now what I'm going to do is to generate the budget lines for this. If you had budget lines, if you check this delete existing lines, it would delete those and just recreate them. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And then for each location that met that, and there were 9 of them in my case, it created a budget line for each one. So the next step would be to go in and open these, put in your numbers for this budget line, and proceed to the next one. Now, at the end of this, I'll show you a technique that I've used with, you could use Maximo's import-export. I'll show you a technique I used with MX Loader to make that a lot easier to fill this out so you don't have to do it one by one, so to speak. Okay. Okay, so let's, we'll come back to this as an example. So for now, just remember this 2008 test. We'll come back to it in a minute. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. And let's just do a little bit of a review real quick. So the budget administrator is the one that manages the budget focal points. So the ones that come out of the box from IBM are assets, location, chart of account, those 3, and then 6 GL segments. You can, as I said earlier, create your own focal points using this manage focal points action that's in the budget monitoring application. I went in and it was fairly easy to do. I created one for work orders. Now, to manage the rules of what goes in each bucket, you use the manage rules action, as I said earlier, and that can be, you know, that can be more difficult to do one by one and kind of establish your own rules. So IBM has put in an auto configuration button that goes out and creates rules that they feel most organizations would want and what they would put in each of those 3 buckets. There are 53 rules that they've currently defined. I'll go through those here in a little bit, not all of them, but I'll show you where they're at and how you create them. You can also define your own rules and start with the IBM ones and then build off of those if you like. Okay. So as a budget manager, you do just what I did, which is to create a budget record. You generate budget lines. You either manually go in and update the budget for each line you've generated, or use the import-export, as I'll show later, the MX loader for bulk loading. You approve it, and then you can update the budgets, and it takes the transactions and calculates the values for each of those buckets and posts them against the budget line. And then, of course, there is one budget report that comes with it. It's called a budget detail report, and I'll show you that as well. So as a Maximo user, you create transactions on work orders by filling out work plans and actual tabs, purchase requisitions, purchase orders, receipts, invoices, and issues can, if you're using all of that, add up into and roll into the budget. Using IBM's rules, this is kind of how it vets out. So the estimated bucket is anything that's put on a work plan, on the plans tab of a work order that has status waiting approval, and then all other statuses either go to committed or actual. And then you can see the same for direct issues, material, services, standard services from a work order, and POs and whatnot. So this is kind of a good slide to at a high level to understand IBM's logic and how they've put things together. There is a budget monitoring report that allows you to look at your budgeted amount against your estimated, your committed, and your actual, and then it breaks it down further there, as you can see. And then there's a detailed report for each line in your budget as to what your internal labor, external labor is, and materials all the way across. Services and tools are all in here as well. Okay. So let's go back in here, and I wanted to show you a few other things. Though, let me get to another Maximo instance where I wanted to show you how you actually generate the rules. So I'll log in here. I'll go ahead and grab the budget monitoring application. And here what I'm going to do is, I don't have a budget in here. I didn't pull one up yet. So I just want to go to Manage Rules right here. And you can see there's no rules in here. And so when you hit Auto, you can put one in and fill these things out and create it. Or you can hit Manage Rules and hit this Auto Configure button, and it'll go out there and give you the 53 that IBM has defined. So in here, for example, actual internal labor, if you open this up, they've actually filled this out that shows the details of that rule, and the operation is whether I am adding it to the budget, or if it's a minus sign, I'm taking it away from the budget. So if I had something in a budget and then I canceled the work order, or if I had it where I canceled a PO or a PR or something like that, that might be a minus sign, which means I'm taking it out of the budget and not adding it in, or if it's a plus sign, of course, it increases it. Now, I show this to make note of something. I'll just pull up a given rule that was put in here. And when you look down here, this looks at the priority of how dates are considered. And I found a bit of an issue with this that IBM has since rectified, but I'll tell you what it is. So in this example, for the rules that they sent out, they first look and interrogate the report date of a work order. If it's empty, they look at the target start date, and if that's empty, it goes to the scheduled start date. Well, that didn't work for me because I wanted everything off of the scheduled start date, and if it was blank, go to the target. I really don't care in my budget when it was reported. So I just warn you, if you use the out-of-the-box rules, know that IBM is adjusting it to make the scheduled start date first by default. But again, you can change that. So just to show you the difference here, I'm looking at this one condition, which is called BudgeMon 97. I'm going to cancel out of here, and I'll go look at and show you that in my system, and the one I've been using here. And when I go to Manage Rules, and I look at that same rule here, you'll see that I don't even look at report date. I just wanted scheduled start date first, and then target start date. And that, for me, that's the way I wanted to do that. Okay, so I'll cancel this. So with that, let's show you a couple other things. So we talked here about the rules are created with auto configuration and that it had a bit of an issue, which IBM is resolving. But it's something that you can fix easily on your end as well. So now I want to do is to show you this MX loader and how you can use that to quickly bring in and fulfill budget lines and establish budget lines and values for those budgets. So you remember in Maximo we had these 9 budget lines created, but I don't have a budgeted amount here, and believe me, I don't want to go through each of those, especially if I had a couple hundred or a couple thousand budget lines. I wouldn't want to go fill that out manually. So what I did is I used MX Loader, and I created a tab in here where I look at the Maximo main object for budgets, and I pulled out header attributes as well as sub-table attributes down at the line level. And here I'm going to actually go and do a query and pull in budgets that were where the budget name was 2018 test. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. So there we go. So it downloaded those 9 records. Now what I can do in my spreadsheet is to go in here, and I'll just put $1,000 in here for each one of these. Copy that. Take this, and we'll string that across here. And just about like that. Okay, and now what I'll do is come back here and change the action, not from a query, but to a sync it back to Maximo and change those values. So I'll go ahead and run that. That's done. So I'll go back to Maximo. I'll pull up my record again. And now you can see I've got that filled out right here. It was populated from the spreadsheet. So that's a quick way that you can throw in budget lines and do that in mass and kind of figure it out in a spreadsheet before you commit it to Maximo. So that's a quick run through. I think that in this, again, if you have a need to take a further look at this and you needed help with it, feel free to give me a call. Cohesive has spent some time with this, and we've got resources that understand it. So my phone number and email are here, and then there will be a link on this PowerPoint that you'll get where you can go and get the recorded version of this. So thank you for your participation, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.